right, I want to thank everyone for coming to our first post-session town hall. Really excited to have everyone here, and it's been an amazing, brutal but amazing session working with my colleagues that are also joining us as colleagues for this town hall. So really appreciate them making the time. Gonna let them introduce themselves. Just gonna kind of give you a quick rundown of show and what the rules of engagement are gonna be. So we're gonna go ahead and I've got two staffers here, Sarah Bennett, raise your hand, and Austin Byrne. If you'll have any questions that you want answered during the Q&A portion of the town hall, please raise your hand and they will hand you a note card and it will get to us. That way we can keep the flow of the town hall and see your question ahead of time and be able to put them in order and try and lump topics together so we're not answering the same question over and over again. So we're going to do intros. It's from 5:05 to 5:15. We're going to discuss how the session went. I'm going to provide a 30,000-foot overview of some of the most talked about bills that we ran under the dome. Then Senator Kolker is going to what he specifically ran. Representative Dickson is going to speak about what she specifically ran, and then I will anchor it by talking about what I ran. Then we'll go into Q&A. We did receive questions ahead of time, so I'll run through those, and then we'll start going through the note cards. So does that sound good, everybody? Yeah. That's a little tepid. Yes. Good, everybody. Yes. All right, so I'll give a brief intro. My name is Representative David Ortiz. Oh wait, we have others that are here too. So I just noticed we had Mayor Schlachter here. So if you please stand up, be recognized. Give a round of applause.
I want to take 15 minutes. I got to go back and take many steps, but I just wanted to come and thank you all for everything you do and show us what they're doing this here. So
thanks for being here. We've got school board member Joan. If you would stand up and be recognized as well. Anyone else before we get started, I want to recognize you ahead of time. Great. All right. Moving right in. Okay. So the House Representative for HD 38, Littleton, and the western parts of Centennial. Obviously, veteran living with a disability. I'm an Air Force brat, lived everywhere. First generation American on my mom's side. My dad was in Air Force, so that's why we moved around. Third generation service member. So that's the quick down and dirty. I'm going to go ahead and hand it on to Senator Kolker.
Quick.
Most of you don't want to hear me. Hi, Chris Kolker, Senate District 16. How many people live in Senate District 16 that are here? All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Senate District 16 was redistricted this year, so I've been moved west. I'm starting at Quebec, going all the way to Kent Carroll. I am a former high school teacher, but it feels like a lifetime ago. It's been 24 years since I've been in the classroom. I've been in finance ever since. I'm a certified financial planner, and my wife is a middle school counselor. We have 2 young daughters, so pushing education and behavioral health, mental health awareness is huge for me. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Representative Ruby Dickson. I represent District 37, which is basically Central, Centennial, Greenwood Village, and one executive Arapahoe County between those. And I am a lifelong Coloradan. I was also a public school student here, so I care very much about supporting our schools. And professionally, I'm an economist. I work in charity, on poverty, climate change, public health issues, that sort of thing. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today. It's really great to see such a good crowd.
And also would be remiss if I didn't welcome the folks that are joining us via Zoom. So really glad to have you here as well. All right, moving right along, I'm going to talk about the 2023 legislative session highlights. It is only going to be a brief overview. If you do have questions or want more detail, you can put them on the cards and ask them. Plus, some of my amazing colleagues ran some of these bills, so I don't want to steal their thunder as well. So let's talk about gun safety and gun violence prevention. We expanded who can file an extreme risk protection order to Senate Bill 23-170. We removed overly broad immunity protections for gun sellers with Senate Bill 23-168, and Senator Kolker was on that. And prohibits the possession and sale or transfer of unserialized ghost guns through Senate Bill 23-279. And we raised the purchasing age to 21 with Senate Bill 23-169 and created a 3-day waiting period through House Bill 23-1219. So for reproductive rights, we protected reproductive health care patients and providers and prevented state employees from assisting in interstate investigations, and that was through Senate Bill 23-188. We increased family planning and STI services while limiting surprise billing, and that was through Senate Bill 23-189. And we also limited deceptive practices by anti-abortion centers, and that was through Senate Bill 23-190. For the topic of taxes, we referred Prop H8 to the people to reduce property tax assessment rates, and that was through Senate Bill 23-303, and make TABOR refunds more equitable, cutting flat check for incomes under $100,000, and that was through House Bill 23-1311. In healthcare, we strengthened the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and that was through House Bill 23-1225, and Rep. Dickson, that was one of her bills, so great work on that. And we made it an unfair practice for PBMs to charge employers more than pharmacies get charged, and that was through House Bill 1201. We improved access to behavioral health of offering mental health screenings in schools, and that was through House Bill 23. I'm just gonna stop reading the numbers. If you guys want to know, I will, yeah, we'll get that to you. I feel like a robot here. We also streamlined the hiring process for mental health and professionals. Required coverage for multiple types of therapy, and Senator Kolker worked on that bill, so I'm sure let's talk more about it. For housing, we protected renters by limiting security deposit amounts and income requirements, and let renters reuse rental applications. We also encouraged affordable housing through public-private investments. We supported local government's ability to purchase affordable housing and provided tax exemptions for low-income housing built by nonprofits. Climate change, environment, and wildfires, over $60 million of tax incentives for decarbonizations. We reduced time and cost of solar installations. We strengthened emission reductions. We also expanded EV charging infrastructure. We added flexibility for transit agencies, implementing free transit rides during peak ozone times. And we invested $6 million in water quality. We invested in restoring natural stream systems for fresh water. We required oil and gas companies to recycle their water, and we allowed people in HOAs to have water-wise landscaping, and invested $12.6 million in the state water plan to protect the Colorado River. The following bills were big ones that failed. So these ones we will read their numbers in case you want to look them up on your own. So Senate Bill 23-213, the land use bill, it died on the calendar in the Senate. House Bill 23-1171. The Just Cause Eviction Bill died on the calendar in the Senate. You know, same thing here. House Bill 23-1115, the Rent Stabilization Bill, died in the Senate. Local Government and Housing Committee. Senate Bill 23-060, Consumer Taker Protection Bill, was vetoed by the governor. All right, so that is the 30,000-foot view. At this time, I'm going to hand it to my Senate colleague, Senator Kolker, to answer for themselves in the Senate.
Thank you for the breakdown. There were over 600 bills introduced this year. Over 400 were passed. I'm not responsible for all of them, so I did do a lesser number of bills this year than I did in the past, and focused a lot on budget issues and education issues. This was the first year I was appointed to the Education Committee, and was really digging deep into education issues and education funding. That is something that is my #1 priority going forward, is to fully fund education and get rid of the BS factor, which we voted to get rid of this year. So everyone know that. We voted and committed this year not to have a BS factor after next year. So that's a huge push for education funding. But as you know, in legislature, we can pass another bill to take it back. And I want to make that more of a permanent entity, that we fund education and find the money elsewhere when we need it. A couple of big bills this year, as was listed, beginning with the gun bill, the immunity protections for gun sellers and manufacturers. Now, what that bill did, and I want to be clear about that, was take away an overly protective law we already had on the books that said you could not sue a dealer or manufacturer unless there was a defect. And if there was a defect and you tried to take them to court, you had to pay their court costs immediately. And what we did was put this on par with consumer protections across all businesses. Other businesses can be sued in civil court for violating law. So can gun dealers and manufacturers now. That's the big takeaway. There is still a bar, still a high bar that has to be proven that they were liable. Okay, so there's still due process, but we didn't even have a shot at that due process before, now we do. Another bill that wasn't mentioned that I want to highlight was House Bill 23-1112, the Earned Income and Child Tax Credit Bill. Actually, a bill that came from our Tax Policy Expenditure Committee, that's an interim committee with Representative Byrd and Senator Hansen and myself. This bill should be talked about more. This bill does more for working families and the working poor than any other bill that we have passed, because it gives them income tax credits, not only for the income they're making, the taxes they're paying, making sure they can get paid back, but also for child tax credits. This is increasing the ability for the working families to make a living in this state. And I'm very proud of that, and I feel that we need to talk more about what we're doing for working families, and that is the biggest piece we've done this year. How many people are para members? Okay, then you may have heard of Senate Bill 56, compensation direct distribution to para. It was $15 million that actually went back into para that we did not pay in 2020. So in 2020, because of the budget shortfall going on with COVID, we withheld a commitment we made in 2018 to continue to fund para. And I fought all session for this bill. I fought tooth and nail for $30 million, and we settled with 15. But we got 15 when everybody going in said we weren't going to get anything. So I'm really proud of that bill, helping our retirees, helping the promise that we made in 1931 when para was founded before Social Security. One other major impact bill that I did that I'm still working on something for next session was the school resource officer training, mandatory school resource officer training. School resource officers are an important part in our schools in this district. That's what I've heard from my district. That's what I heard from my schools. They are mentors in this district. They're not just there to protect our students, but to mentor our students, to be available. One of the things that I want to make sure that we're doing is giving them the training that they need, that everyone that goes into these buildings understands how to interact with students at different age levels. I know as a former teacher in the training that I had that we had to account for the development of children and of different age groups. And we want our officers who are in our buildings to know that and to be able to handle that. They're doing a great job now. We want to make sure it continues with equitable, equal training across the board. This bill was pared down to give them continuing education for school, for the Safe to Tell program. It's requiring them to get together with the Attorney General's office every year after the school year is over to train on how to respond to Safe to Tell. Also to give them an opportunity to talk to each other, to talk about what they learned from this session, from this school year, what could be improved, what's working, what's not working, so that we start interacting with each other. So those are some of the highlights from the session for me. I handed out a sheet. If you received it, you'll see a front and back or 2 pages on some of the highlights of those bills that I was able to sponsor and pass this year. Thank you.
And finally, hi, again, I'm Representative Ruby Dickson. And as many of you may know, this was actually my first legislative session. I was first elected last November. So this was my first experience in the Capitol, figuring out how to pass bills, how to get things through. And I'm proud to say that I passed every bill that I introduced this year. So that was But this was a very intense session. People that have been here for many years longer than I have said that it was just extraordinarily intense and that we passed a lot of things that maybe not all of them made the news as much as, I think that they're important, but let's just say in the House, we had a lot of late nights. We had a ton of vigorous and exciting debate. We had a ton of people speaking very passionately about many of the bills that we passed, and I'm super proud of the work that we did. I want to bring it back to a lot of conversations that I had at the doors last year when I was on the campaign. I knocked on many, many thousands of doors and talked to people about what matters to them in our community in District 37. And I campaigned on trying to help people with those problems and those concerns. So one thing that I heard time and time again, especially after the Dobbs decision last year, which was a year ago this week, about how people were really concerned about their reproductive freedom. And they were concerned that they wouldn't have access to reproductive care that they need. And they were concerned that people would be coming into Colorado from all over the country trying to seek this care and that there would be huge problems. And I'm very proud that we ran and passed a lot of bills this year, especially the top three that Representative Ortiz mentioned, to protect reproductive freedom in Colorado. And I'm just very excited to have been a part of that and to have made good on those campaign promises. Another thing that people brought up to me a lot was the cost of living. People said that they were concerned about inflation, that they were concerned about, the cost of transportation and fuel and housing, and that if it wasn't a burden to them, that it was a burden to their children who couldn't afford to live near them. And that's why I'm proud that we ran some really exciting things to help out families economically this year. Not just the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, which I agree is super exciting. And as an economist, I've been hearing people in the national economic scene talking about what a leader Colorado is in this space, which is really a great place to be in. But not just that, but also, as we discussed, a lot of the bills that we passed to address the cost of living crisis related to housing, both for homeowners and for renters, and there's definitely still more we can do there, but we did a lot this year. As well as, of course, the cost of housing translates to the issues with our homelessness crisis in the Denver metro area. And we have taken some steps, but there's definitely a lot more that I want to do to help those people as well, and to get people off our streets and make sure that we are all happy living in the communities that we're living in here. And finally, I worked on a lot of policies this year relating to the environment. I grew up in Louisville, in the north metro suburbs, and so the Marshall Fire destroyed a ton of my own hometown in the middle of winter, and that really freaked me out. And as a young person, it's very important to me that we are serious about tackling the climate crisis, and that we are serious about making sure that Colorado is not just meeting our climate goals, but being a leader in a way that helps every person in this state and helps us become an economic leader nationwide and globally. So I'm proud of the work that we've done in that space as well. And I think we've gone into quite a lot of detail about some of the random things we've done this year, but I'm excited to hear what thoughts you have on what we've done and what questions you have about how that went, and also any thoughts you have on what you want to see from us next session.
So I'm going to make this real quick too. I ran 13 bills during the session. 11 have been passed into law. All 11 were signed by the governor, so proud of that. Ran some 40 some on my first few years. So, but I mean, Senator Kolker mentioned how much passed through the system a couple of years ago, but that's because we were going through the COVID crisis. We were receiving a lot of federal dollars for that effort to prevent the spread of, but also to recover from. And I was proud of our state in that we had interim committees to deal with how to dole out that funding intelligently. And just to remind you, there were three buckets we looked at. We looked at affordable attainable housing. We looked at mental health care, because it was all COVID did was make our mental health care crisis more acute and made us more aware of the shortcomings. And then it was job growth, job development. So those are three buckets that we did this year. Because we had such a super majority in the House, and because we've had close to a super majority in the Senate, I felt comfortable really focusing on areas that I know the most about and areas that tend to get ignored. In some cases by both sides of the aisle, in most cases by one side of the aisle. That's disability rights, and that's serving and honoring our veterans. So just going down the bills that I ran, remedies for persons with disabilities, this eliminates the exhaustion requirement for people seeking remedies against discrimination. So the way the state had set up that law, the anti-discrimination law originally, was that we would have to file a complaint through a department through the state of Colorado. And quite often it would be delayed for a year to 2 years. And often as well, they wouldn't even be able to make a ruling. An example would be an individual with a disability had a service dog in their hotel room that they stayed at, and they were charged a fee for it. So they went through the arbitration process through the department. The hotel admitted that they were in the wrong, but they never get to the table, so nothing ever happened, right? So it was really critical that we eliminate that piece to be able to start securing basic access. Despite ADA being law for 30+ years, there's still plenty of places that I can't get in the front door and even use the bathroom or enjoy the services, and that has to end. I fought for this country, I swore an oath to this nation, I deserve to have access to those freedoms just like everyone else does. So that was a really important first step. Didn't go as far as I wanted to. There was a lot of compromise made this year. There were concerns made by the business community, and despite getting billions of dollars of tax cuts my first 2 years, they really had a lot of leverage with the Gov's office, so I agreed to compromise out some of the more contentious parts of that bill to go to this task force. And that leads me to the next bill that I got passed, which is a task force to study the rights for persons with disabilities. So we're going to be looking at the anti-discrimination law and looking at some of the tenets of the bill that got removed, the version that passed. We're going to be looking at attainable, accessible housing as an area of focus as well. And we're also going to be looking at access when it comes to participating, running for office, serving in office, or even just serving as a staffer or one of the dependents when it comes to having basic access to our government. That is a basic right that we all that are able-bodied get to enjoy and take for granted. We that live with a disability should be enjoying those rights in the same way. So those are the three main areas that task force is going to be looking at. And then basic access in the outdoors. Sorry, that was another bill that I relegated. It was going to be a task force anyways. Part of the reason why I did come here is Craig Hospital is second to none for spinal cord rehab and brain injury rehab. The adaptive sports here in Colorado are second to none. I don't care what any other state tries to tout. It's because we have the amazing and beautiful Rockies here. I was a runner before I got hurt, running 5-minute miles. I am downhill ski now, cross country ski now, I mountain bike, I kayak, and that's because of the amazing adaptive sports programs we have here. That being said, these mountains are replacing their old lifts with lifts that are not accessible for me. Some of the trail entrances are not accessible for individuals that require unadapted equipment to use those trails. So we're going to be looking at how to work collaboratively to make sure our outdoor spaces stay accessible for people with disabilities. Besides that, I ran eviction protections for residential tenants and protects residents from evictions if they are disabled or on public assistance for TANF. So instead of only having 3 days before you start going through the eviction process, it gives you longer, it gives you a week. And then it makes you go through an arbitration process as well. It did roll out fundings for mediation. Mediation programs here in Colorado have a great track record. They're amazing programs. And often when these issues do go to court, you have both sides that have not even talked to each other by the time it gets there. And we've heard both sides stating, well, if I would just talk to the person, we wouldn't have to be here. So this bill makes sure that we are granting those that are on the brink of losing their housing and becoming homeless, giving them an opportunity to make sure they work out whatever issues they have with their landlord and be able to stay in their housing. I ran a prosthetic device for recreational activity bill. So this is mostly about the kids wanting to participate with their able-bodied counterparts at school and sports, simply for a prosthetic device. So it mandates coverage by insurance companies for a prosthetic device. Enforce laws against pharmacy benefit managers. We've done a lot the past 3 to 4 years, making sure that the pharmaceutical benefit managers do not get to pocket savings that they're supposed to be passing on to consumers. So this enforcement laws that we've been passed in the past 2 to 3 years. Next, the continuation of military retirement benefit deduction. Extends military retirement benefit deductions for taxpayers under the age of 55 through 2033. So we want to make sure that we're honoring the service of those that are retired. The average age of retirement, the earliest you can retire is 48, sorry, 38, excuse me. We're not done working at 38. And we want to make sure we're incentivizing veterans to come here and start their career by offering a tax break on a portion of their military retirement benefits. Veterans Cemetery, Department of Public Safety, gifts, grants, and donations. This just makes sure that we're creating other ways of funding for our amazing Veterans Cemetery out in the Western Slope. Colorado Veterans Service and Career Program. This has been an amazingly successful program. We want to continue the funding there. Veterans with disability property tax exemption requirements makes an administrative change to make sure that the counties are now overseeing this instead of the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Sunset Health Equity Commission, we made the Health Equity Commission permanent to make sure that we are creating greater equity across the board when it comes to those that are accessing healthcare, those of color, those with disability, aging. And then the last one I ran that got passed was conforming workforce development statutes. Long story short, we ran the apprenticeship program bill, or I did, with Representative now Senator, why am I supposed to know his name? I know what I'm talking about. Sullivan. There you go. Thank you. Sullivan, yeah. Senator Sullivan. So this made sure that we were in line with federal regulations and rules so that we could be federally recognized and get access to federal programs as well. So that's what I did pass. What was lost was the federal access or the access by government by persons with disabilities. That's getting relegated to the task force, and the basic housing access and the outdoor access getting relegated to the task force. So we PI'd those bills. We decided to kill those bills so that they can be worked on in the task force. You better believe that it's going to be coming back next year. All right, so that's that. Next on the agenda, we're making space for announcements. So I don't know if anybody up here at the table, Representative Dickson.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ortiz. And wow, seems like there were a lot of bills that got done this year from all of us here at the table and from the other, 97 of us in the General Assembly. So very proud of that. I just wanted to give 2 announcements before we go into the Q&A. The first one is that I have started to talk to people both in the Department of Public Health and Environment and at the local Centennial Airport about some of the public health concerns that I've heard about the Centennial Airport. And so I know I've been getting some emails from some of my constituents. I'm not sure if any of you guys are here, but if you live near the Centennial Airport or within the flight path of the Centennial Airport, first of all, always would love to hear from you about what your thoughts are about living near that or under the flight path. And also, if you are concerned about either noise exposure or potentially heavy metal exposure, particularly lead exposure from burning leaded plane fuel, please come and talk to me, because I've just recently had a conversation with the Department of Public Health and Environment about how anyone who is concerned about something like this should be eligible for lead testing, which would be really helpful to keep you and your family safe, and is especially helpful for young children. So that's just a sort of a public safety announcement about that. And my second announcement is that I am starting to want to have conversations about what bills I want to run next year. I kind of got thrown into the legislative session very quickly between my election and January of this year. But I want to really have as many conversations as I can about what is important to the people of our communities. So if you have an idea, or if you have just something that is really bugging you about state policy, or if you have any friends or connections who are local community leaders that might have something that they want to see, please connect with me, because I want to represent you in this community. So this is just an open call between now and January that I would love to hear from you, because my job is to represent you in the Capitol. Thank you.
So I hope we have any announcements.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up. I actually met with the Department of Human Services today with Arapahoe County and Commissioner Morbilli, and they brought up a service that's being offered that I don't think many people are aware of, so I wanted to highlight it. It's a website. It's called Arapa Source, and it's to get people who are looking for food, who have food insecurity, who have housing insecurity, or they're having trouble at home providing for their kids. What happens with DHS, sometimes people call DHS because they see kids who are in need, but they don't know who else to call besides calling the hotline, the reporting line. And the reporting line will take and send people off to the correct areas where they can get that help. But the reporting line too is to make sure that we're investigating when we see problems, when we see children being harmed or adults being harmed. So a RAPA source was developed to give people all these resources in one place when they're in need. Kind of like 211, that would be my second announcement. If you don't know 211, 211 is a statewide hotline to also find resources for anything that you may think you may need that hopefully government or nonprofits can help with. Whether it's finding treatment, finding care, health care, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, mental health resources. 211 is a great resource that I think everyone should have a particular time to. But in Arapahoe County, it's Arapahoe source. Thank you.
All right. I would also like to extend this opportunity for a school board member, Joey Anderson. Do you have any announcements for us while you're here? All right, seeing none. All right, we're gonna move on to the Q&A, and I have a list of pre-submitted questions. And then we'll talk through those, and I'm gonna let my colleagues decide first whether they want to take those, and then I will anchor them. So I'll ask them and let you decide which ones you want to answer, and then if my colleagues did not answer, then I will take a crack at it and then move on to the next one. All right, first topic is housing. So three questions or comments here. One is, I hope you will discuss housing affordability and the impact greed is having on housing. So, all right, so we can discuss that. Let me get through the rest of the questions, and that way you guys can pick and choose. HB 1115 and Senate Bill 213. The rent stabilization was 1115 for those of you that aren't aware of the number, and then 213 was a land use bill. They died in the Senate on the calendar. How do you think housing issues will be approached in 2024? So kind of lump all that together. Who wants to start us off?
Not really.
213.
Or no?
I can speak.
From the Senate perspective?
I'm just going to speak from the Senate perspective on the land use bill 213. And that bill was a very contentious bill. I was one of the no votes on that bill. So, finally, even though we didn't take a vote on it, I was a person pushing back against that bill at the behest of my constituents. When the bill first came out, March 30th, it was 100 and some page bill. On March 30th, it was a little over a month off session. There was a lot to be disseminated from that bill. I will give credit to the majority leader, Senator Moreno, who took a lot of input, put a lot of amendments in, and we actually passed it out of the Senate with amendments. But we passed it without, by allowing local control, local entities to still have their authority. When it went to the House and then it was amended and then came back, I was a part of the group who said, no, the way it was out of the Senate is the way we wanted it. Because of everything I had heard from my constituents in both cities, Centennial and Littleton, that we needed more time for the affordable housing bills and propositions to make their way. I get the concept of a land use bill. I totally am for making sure that we are condensing so that we can have more housing. I just didn't see much about it in affordable housing. So that is something that a reason I was against that bill. I do think it will come back in some shape or form. Hopefully there'll be a lot more stakeholding, a lot more input from those around the state.
And so I was generally in support of land use reform. And just for transparency, I voted yes on the version of 213 that made it out of the House. I'm a member of the Housing Committee in the House. It's called the Transportation, Housing, and Local Government Committee. And one of the reasons that I wanted to be on that committee is because, like I said earlier, housing costs were one of the biggest things that I heard about at the doors. I have many people in my community who are just really concerned about the cost of housing in our area. And as an economist, I see housing as a market issue like many other market issues. And thus, being able to expand housing supply is crucial to reducing costs and making it easier for people to especially build sort of a starter home or to buy or even to rent a starter home. And so I was very excited to see that there was going to be potentially some movement on this issue of land use reform. And when the bill was introduced, it was introduced about halfway through the session, and it was kind of a surprise to all of us. We had heard something was coming, but hadn't really been looked into the process. And so I immediately started getting thousands of emails from my community. I have a very involved and very invested community. I'm very lucky for that in District 37. And so I received thousands of emails, and many from both sides of this issue. I have many constituents that were concerned about some parts of the bill, and many that were really excited about it. And so for me, it came down to weighing the different concerns of different people in my district, and also thinking about it given the expertise that I was elected with, which is that of an economist. So ultimately, being on the committee that worked on House Bill 213 and also House Bill 1115, I worked very closely with the sponsors on both of these bills, and I was proud that the bills that we passed out of the House, in my opinion, were very good bills for the people of Colorado. I think it's important to discuss what 213 did and why it's important and meaningful. So 213 is about land use. But what that really means is what property owners are allowed to do with their own property, and if they're allowed to build housing on it. This was never about, forcing anyone to build anything. It was never about using public dollars to build things or forcing cities to do any particular thing about building something. It was just about allowing private property owners to do what they want with their property. And this had a ton of support for people all across the ideological spectrum. I spoke to constituents and Coloradans who were representatives of the business community, of labor, of environmental groups, of economic justice groups, really people from just all across the spectrum who were so excited because being able to build more housing, and especially this slightly gentle density type of housing where people are able to potentially walk around their community and potentially have a little bit more diversity of housing options is really good for housing affordability, for being able to get on the ladder of home ownership. It's good for the environment. It's good for social cohesion. There's just a ton of things that are very good for our state and for each of our communities about being able to do what we want and build on our own property. So I was really excited and very proud of the bill that we passed out regarding 213. And I do want to speak to the issue of rent control. This was something that was a really big deal at the start of the session, and I think got overshadowed a little bit. But the House Bill 1115 about rent stabilization, as it was introduced, allowed cities to do whatever kind of rent control we wanted. And as an economist, I was a little bit leery of that because we've seen that there are some forms of rent control that can be really dangerous for housing markets and can cause sort of unintended consequences. So I worked very hard with the sponsor to put in amendments that basically put in guardrails so that if there was rent stabilization policy in Colorado, that it would prevent, extreme free and price gouging and prevent crazy situations where people are forced to choose between paying 50% more next year in rent or being on the streets. But it wouldn't cause huge crazy bubbles in the housing market, or it wouldn't cause people to completely stop building new housing units. So we really worked hard to try to put guardrails on what I thought was ultimately a good idea. And I was really proud to have passed that out of the House. And unfortunately, that also died in the Senate, along with just cause for eviction. There were really some housing policies that did pass out of the House in a somewhat strong form that you're not going to see kind of policies here in Colorado. But as I said before, this is one of the top issues that I hear about from my community. And I am very much looking forward to coming back next session and working further on housing issues to see what we can get through that will help solve this issue that really touches every facet of our society in Colorado.
I cannot put it better than that. I'll just be transparent as well and say that I was also in support of the rent stabilization bill as they passed it out of committee and as we passed it out of the House, and the land use bill for all the specific reasons that my colleague brought up. The bottom line is climate change, housing affordability, housing access, mass transportation. These are statewide and local issues. And this bill, what it was going to do was allow to get input from local communities, counties, resort areas, because they also need to be treated differently than other local communities need to be for what they bring to the state, the workforce issues that they face that we don't necessarily face. It was going to allow that input in a very strategic and cohesive way. These issues are global. There's value in working together in a global strategic way to make sure we are solving these problems in a meaningful way, while also considering local control and local input. So I was really supportive of the version that did come from the House. I think we all were disappointed that it didn't come before us until March 30th. This should have been one of those that was vetted and worked on and, you know, press conference done, celebrated from the very beginning. I'm not going to speak for why that happened. I don't know. But I feel like the House did its job and did the best we could with what we were handed. This is an issue that will come back, and I don't see my values changing. I'm going to be looking forward to working together in a more fleshed out and timely manner to make sure that we do this right the next year. So I'm excited about both of those coming forward. And not to mention that this also will tend to housing accessibility. We're building corridors around or surrounded by mass transit, especially in certain buildings that are going to be mandated to have that are up to ADA code. This will only help those living with a disability have an affordable option. So I'm really excited about that part of it as well. All right, that was housing. Let's move back on to environmental issues. So I'm going to take these two at a time because we have 6 here. I hope we will discuss, or you will discuss, what environmental initiatives we are proposing and driving at. And then the next one is, what are our thoughts on curtailments? That is curtailing the use of green power, which is now abundant and plentiful at lower cost, which allow XL to force night use of electricity so they can generate it with all accompanying GHG emissions and greater profits. So this is a very specific viewpoint on curtailment. So we'll take those two. Senator Kolker, do you want to start us off, or?
You go ahead.
So love these questions. As I said, I focused a lot on environmental issues this session, and I plan to continue to do so in the future. As an economist, I do work on a lot of climate issues in my day job, so I have somewhat of a background in these issues. And also, as a young person, I expect to continue living on this planet, hopefully for a while. So I want to make sure that we have a good planet to live on and that we can continue to enjoy our beautiful open spaces that we all love. So some of the issues that I worked on this year are carbon management. So there's really exciting potential in the world generally for carbon management, which means pulling carbon out of the air or preventing it from being put out into the air in the first place. And it also means, you know, when we have tried to figure out what to do with this carbon, that we actually have a place to store it so that if we do have carbon, that it's not just flying back out into the air and warming the planet. So I ran 2 bills related to carbon management, House Bill 1210 and Senate Bill 285, if you're interested, to start trying to look into what things could be possible in Colorado, how could we become a leader in this, and what risks exist, and what, you know, potential pitfalls might exist that we can avoid when we're working on further policy in Colorado. Senate Bill 285 changed a existing state department so that they can start looking into both these issues and also so that we have a state agency overseeing geothermal energy so we can start scaling that up. Because of course we all know Colorado has great renewable resources as far as wind and solar, but we also have a ton of potentially great geothermal resources, and that can bring down costs for ordinary people by, you know, using a lot of passive heating and cooling techniques in your home, but it can also be used to generate electricity and industrial heat in ways that can also seriously reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There's also, in addition to climate work, another environmental bill that I worked on was about water quality testing. So the Department of Public Health has a responsibility to make sure that water quality is sufficiently high, and specifically that drinking water is safe in Colorado. So I passed the bill to allow them to basically carry out their business in a way that actually works. And that will allow them to do their work. It'll keep us safer, and it will also bring down costs for people by allowing, for example, water filtration plants to actually operate, because there have been ground to a halt due to problems with the regulatory process that I ran this bill to fix. So that's a few different angles of environmental policy that I ran this year. But I also am on the Energy and Environment Committee, so I can also talk about any other environmental bills that you guys have heard about this year. There were some really exciting ones, including tax credits for decarbonization, and just some really great stuff. So happy to talk about any of that.
Thank you. And receiving this question before the town hall was actually the first time I've heard of the curtailment issue. And I haven't had time to dig into that. I did send that question out to an expert in the industry to find out what their response is. So I can't give you a fully well-reasoned thought on that particular question. Just one of those things that I need to take more time and find out more about. The other issues that I'm dealing with environmental issues and initiatives. As I said earlier, my focus has been on a few issues that I've tried to make myself more of an expert in. I am pro our environmental caucus. I am in support of what we're trying to do. I am here to help. We have certain people in our Senate caucus. It's very diverse, and also in the House caucus that focus on specific issues. And they're the leaders that I look to and look to help with when it comes to environmental issues. And that's Senator Faith Winter, a new senator this year. Not Senator Winter, but Cutter, Senator Cutter, and also a new Democrat this year, Senator Priola, who switched over from a Republican to Democrat and is a huge proponent of renewable energy and promoting and saving our environment. So I take my lead from those three.
Great. Now I'm going to provide the Crayola Army version of my understanding of curtailments, and then I'm going to let Greg Dickson smart it up from there. So for those that don't know what curtailments are, it's the purposeful reduction in renewable electricity output below the levels that could otherwise have been produced. Okay. And there are two main reasons why this happens. One is system-wide oversupply. So you are an example of system-wide oversupply would be during the springtime, for example, you're just not using as much electricity because of the weather. You're not using as much heat. You're not using as much air conditioning. You're just not using as much electricity. And then also based on different hours of the day, when you have prime usage versus non-prime usage, right? And this energy, and this goes into the second one, either because of not having the infrastructure to transmit this energy or not having the storage capacity, we just don't have the ability to store that or move that energy yet. So that is why sometimes you purposefully throttle the amount of output of renewable energy. So just for those that aren't aware. So that kind of goes into what it is and why. I mean, we could be smarter about it. Some talked about already. What we could do was increasing our ability to transmit this energy and also increasing our ability to store that energy. Something else is an expansion of the Western energy imbalance market. So being able to, and this goes into the transmission part portion, to be able to open the market nationally, to be able to sell to states that might not be producing enough energy. So that will allow, if we're overproducing, a place for that energy to go. So really it's about that. We're gonna have to be working on the longer term for these solutions, but should rest assured and be feel a little reassured that we are working on it. We'd love to have you continue to be engaged on it. And it's not a passage for Dickson to smart out.
No pressure. So that was a great summary of my understanding of a lot of the curtailment issue as well. And something that when I've talked about people both in the renewable and the legacy energy industry is that the traditional way that energy is provided in the economy, whether it's to homes or to businesses or to industrial uses, is that the exact moment that the energy or the electricity is generated, it's used. So when they are, for example, having a big, I don't know, coal or natural gas electricity plant, the moment that they burn that molecule of energy and it creates a certain amount of energy, it goes through the wire and it's immediately used in the system. That is fundamentally not how renewables operate, because you can't control when the wind is blowing or when the sun is shining. So renewables require either extensive storage or extensive interlinked transmission. You have to have a system so that when you have tons and tons of renewable energy coming in, that you have something to do with it, whether it's putting it into giant batteries, whether it's doing some sort of different battery storage technique like pumping water up a mountain, or you have to be sending it to a place that it's currently cloudy. And that way you have sort of an exchange of this energy, and it always has some kind of value. But currently, we don't really have extensive versions of either of that. And so if you don't have a huge battery in your home, but you have solar panels on top of your house, then at peak noon, when no one's home, everyone's at work, and the sun is beating down right onto your solar panels, you are generating huge amounts of electricity, but the legacy electricity system that's wired into your house can't really support taking that much of an electricity load directly onto the grid. So they, at a large scale, when more and more people are installing renewables on their houses and on their businesses, they have serious problems where they could short out the system or cause explosions or fires. It can be pretty dangerous because the system is not set up to have this sort of lumpy electricity load. So the solution would be either to regulate the amount of renewables that are available in the system, which I think there's a lot of people that would not be happy with that solution. It could be distributed storage, so everybody has a big battery in their home. Some people would be happy with that. It could be variable pricing, so that, you know, at some times the pricing could even go negative if there is negative demand for electricity at high noon when no one is using it and there's tons coming in. Or it could mean expedited approvals and permitting for new transmission, potentially, you know, electricity transmission across the Rockies or across the Great Plains, so that we can have markets that we're actually trading this energy with, and we have something that we can do that with. But on the current grid as it is, it's not physically possible to sustain the kind of loads that we're seeing. And so I'm not sure that curtailment is the answer, but we have to make sure that we're protecting public safety and making sure that things are fundamentally physically possible, whatever we're doing. But I think that that is a very worthy goal, and I am looking forward to seeing what solutions we can come up with so that people will have the incentives to install these awesome new technologies in their homes, and they're not unfairly penalized for taking these good actions. Sorry.
All right, we do have more environmental issue questions, but I want to move it along. I just want to be clear for those that did submit. 2 of them are federal issues, not really state issues, but we will get our offices to answer them and give you specific answers. And the last one is around legislation to encourage local community electric generation. Again, I will turn those questions over to my team so they can get you answers, but I want to move that along. All right, safety, guns, and crime. The 2 biggest issues, in this person's opinion, are theft crimes and long-term homelessness. Many voters believe that theft crimes, cars, drugs, trailers, possessions in the home have very significantly increased. Many attribute this to a lack of enforcement due to a lack of legislation codifying too many thefts as misdemeanors. What legislation in the recent session addresses this problem, and what more legislation is planned for the next session? Chronic homelessness is a regional national problem. What legislation was passed this session or will be passed in the next session to address this problem at a state level?
So I can speak to something that we did before Rep. Dickson joined us, and that was making sure that we hold those that are reselling catalytic converters accountable and creating a state registry around that, making sure that those numbers are serialized and tracked. So that is something that we've done specifically around trying to crack down on theft. So I was proud to be yes on that bill. Also, we do have to answer the fact that studies show that simply raising the punishment for a specific crime does not cut down on crime. If we want to really tend to the issue around homelessness, we need to make sure that we are solving the issues around affordable attainable housing. We need to make sure we're solving the issues around being able to get around the city, around mass transit, making sure that we're creating equity and opportunities around education and around job opportunities for those. So that is really what the focus of my work is going to be. I've had interesting discussion with colleagues that colleagues of the Democrats and Republicans that do things differently.
Representative Shannon Bird is one that I differ with sometimes on this issue, but I have a deep love and respect for the work that she does on this issue. So when it comes to these issues, I know that we need to do more. I think quite possibly increasing the training and making sure maybe we're increasing not just funding around equity and not just funding around community programs, but making sure we're supporting law enforcement training to make sure that they're dealing with cultural issues and make sure we're cracking down on those that are committing crimes and bad policing, as we've seen recently outside of Aurora, but making sure that we are creating and fostering an environment that supports those that want to make it a vocation and a career and want to do the right thing. So that's my personal perspective and my values-based.
What Kolker did on the issue. Hold on, I'll fix this and then pass it on.
Just to respond about the crime when it comes to car theft or theft crimes, I had a long conversation with our Redwood County Sheriff, Sheriff Brown, about a lot of the crimes that they were seeing countywide. Those crimes being perpetuated by people with substance abuse problems. They're not crimes of organized crime where they're trying to make money. There were crimes where someone was trying to get something immediately to fix an immediate need, and wasn't on an organized basis. The same goes with cars. Many of our car thefts. How many people have a Kia or Hyundai? Okay, just one that I will admit to it anyway. So those cars, based on certain models, are notorious for being easily stolen using a USB connector. Okay, a flash drive, and many of those thefts are done as joyrides. Again, not something that's done to profit from. So we have a fine line that we're walking on making sure that we're treating the causes, okay, treating the causes of that crime, and also making sure that our community feels safe. Our community, if you're in a car and you're trying to go to work and your car is stolen, well, that's your livelihood. How do we correctly fix that problem? Punish those who appropriately should be punished for violating the law, but also finding ways to prevent that from happening and getting help for the people that need it so it doesn't happen again. We did pass Senate Bill 97 that raised auto theft to a Class 5 felony at the baseline and up to a Class 3 if the thief had 2 prior convictions. We're giving some people some chances here, trying to give them some chances. We also strengthened the auto theft prevention fund under Senate Bill 257. So a couple of things that were done to try to help on the front end, the prevention, the prevention fund to help reimburse, to get people back up on their feet quickly, and also try to prevent that problem or stop that problem from happening again. With homelessness, it is a long-term problem. And it is not only here, it is in so many major cities across this country, if not every major city across this country. Trying to figure out what homelessness is, the solution is, deals a lot with what I just spoke about, the substance use problem, getting people the mental and substance use help that they need, but also having them accept that help. There's only so much that we can force people into doing. And getting people the help when they need it, where they need it. We've passed $400 million in mental health supports from the COVID recovery funds. We can only get so many people here for treatment. We're getting beds out on the Eastern Plains to give people support in homelessness and in mental health, get them back on their feet, but they have to accept that. And that's just another struggle that we're working through, trying to get better, trying to help everyone get better, and understanding where people are coming from.
I definitely agree with the premise of this discussion. I think these are important issues, and it's very important that we all are able to feel safe in our own communities, both for ourselves and for our families. So I completely agree that this is something that we need to make sure that our policies are allowing people to be protected from crimes. And to that end, one thing that I'm very excited about that we passed was allowing for automated traffic enforcement in Colorado if localities choose to do so. So this is one thing, it's not about specifically car thefts, but it can be used to track car theft. And also it reduces some of the strain of traffic violations on our streets, and it reduces some of these negative potential interactions that law enforcement officers sometimes have with members of the community. It can reduce frictions by just having these things being, if you are caught breaking the law, then enforcement happens, rather than there being a potentially dangerous interaction between people in a very stressful situation. So that's one thing that I think can potentially really improve these dynamics between certain first responders and members of our communities. And I also just want to point out that regarding the homelessness issue, that is just a heart-rending issue. And I think something that so many of us care about and want to see fixed in Colorado. And when you look into the data on this, one thing that's really striking is that poverty and GDP per capita are, low GDP per capita are not positively correlated with homelessness. In fact, it's the other way around. Places with some of the richest economies in the country are the places with the biggest homelessness problem. You have here, you have Silicon Valley, you have, a lot of big East Coast cities. Why is that? It's because housing costs are out of control and people that are in vulnerable situations have nowhere to turn. So that's why I think we need to continue working on more housing policy so that we can get people housed. But we did do some really exciting stuff regarding this session, much of which Representative Ortiz highlighted earlier. But I also just want to highlight that last year voters passed Proposition 123, which allocated, I believe, $500 million for affordable housing statewide. That's another really exciting thing that we have going on. And I think there's a lot more that we can do to get people off the streets, to treat people with dignity, to treat whatever potential underlying issues they may or may not have, and to see them become, happy, functioning members of society. I think that would be good for everyone, and I'm excited to see what we can do on that front.
And I would be remiss if, I didn't call out the fact that I do have family members that serve in law enforcement. And I'll be honest, that is not a job that I would want to have. To be real frank, it's a real tough environment right now. And we actually are lucky enough to have an officer here that provides security, not just for the library, but here with us in the town hall. So if everybody would please give them a round of applause for the work that they do. This is an issue, and my value is going to be based on what I've seen work specifically for homeless veterans. We tend to be a part of the population that experiences higher homeless rates, and it is housing first via tiny homes with wraparound services. That is a model that has worked out of Kansas City, that other nonprofits are implementing it now. There's a nonprofit that just finished construction on one at Longmont that is already starting to see great success, so I'm really proud of that. Worked with the Veterans Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus in the state legislature, to try and get $1 million of funding for tiny homes. We weren't able to do it this year, but we're only continuing to grow and try and leverage our power to make sure that we are continuing to push forward this model. And this is based on the fact that back in 2017, there was a law that allowed the Fort Logan land sale that allocated $7.4 million. There was $7.4 million that was supposed to go to veteran mental health, physical health, and wellness. Well, during COVID, we were called upon to serve again by allowing the state to use that funding for something else. Now that we're out of COVID, it is my intention to make sure that we see that $7.4 million restored for those services. Something that I would like to see happen is fund and support tiny home programs with wraparound services. And I would like to see that model start to gain traction with our civilian counterparts. It's a model that works for those that have been through extremely traumatic events via combat, that deal with extreme addiction issues resulting on untreated PTS issues. So I suspect that you'll also see that work with our civilian counterparts that are experiencing homelessness. So that is also something that I'll be doing. And Senator Kolker will specify that. So just
thank you for bringing, both of you for highlighting this. The importance of homelessness recovery is housing first. What they both said. Housing first. You can't get treatment, you can't get help unless you have a safe place to lay your head. And having wraparound services, you have to have that support. We have some of these support centers of recovery residences here in Colorado now. We have 200, I met with them on June 5th, 250 to standards to adhere to for these recovery residences, where they could actually be in a single family home. But we have a lot of discrimination for people who are getting recovery, getting the wraparound services, but people aren't letting them move into their home, their neighborhood. The not in my backyard syndrome. If we're really serious about this, we all have to be in agreement to help whenever possible. I just wanted to consider that when we talk about what we need. Thank you.
All right, I know we've been going back and forth for a while, but at this time, if you're able, because I'm getting a little tired, so please stand up. If you're not able, take a breath, stretch out. I'm not gonna move on until next you guys start stretching out. Yeah, I am. I mean, I can't stand, so y'all have to stand for me, okay? All right. Yeah. All right, let's take our seats again. Appreciate that. We're gonna move on from this sheet. We do have more questions here. I might come back to it, but I really want to get to the cards. And then I want to do, live questions from the audience right now. So one of the cards was directed specifically to Senator Kolker, but I'm going to address it to all of us. It says the handout did not address the only topic that this person is really interested in, and that is the 50% increase they're being assessed in property taxes. What budget percentage is being requested by the various taxing authorities, and how will that be reconciled? So, Senator, do you want to?
You're the economic.
So, yes, many of you, I'm sure, have received your new property evaluations in the mail in the last couple of months. And we've definitely gotten a lot of emails about this issue. I know a lot of people are very concerned that their property taxes may go up. And as the state representatives, we have a certain perspective on this. As many of you may know, your property taxes go to your local government, basically. The state government really does not have much of a hand in this in terms of actually allocating or using that money. It goes back to your local city government, your town government, your county, your school boards, your metro districts, your special districts, your fire districts, all that stuff is what the property taxes, and your sheriff's department, are supported by our local property taxes. So while we were trying to come up with a solution that helps people with this without depriving our local governments of much needed funding, due to the fact that we are in a very high inflation environment and a lot of their local government costs have gone up as well. So in the very last waning days of session, we passed two bills to refer a measure to voters to say, look, this is what we can come up with that helps to reduce the property tax burden for homeowners, but that doesn't completely soak the local governments and leave them unable to perform their basic functions, because we as the state government should not be doing that to our local counterparts that often don't have the capacity to absorb those losses. So some of the things that these bills did, it reduces the property tax assessments by a certain amount depending on your property tax value. But basically your property tax assessment value will go down by, I think, $50,000. It's been a month, sorry. The details are a little bit out of my mind at this point. But it reduces the actual assessed value and reduces the assessment rate by a certain amount each year for the next, 15 years. And it also extends the senior homestead property tax exemption so that, before seniors were able to deduct a certain amount of the value of their home if they had been living there for at least 15 years. That's still true, but now if you've been living in your home for that long and you decide to move, for example, to downsize or to move to an accessible unit, then you can take that tax credit with you. So this is another real much needed solution for homeowners to allow them to make the changes in their lives that they might want to make and to reduce the burden that they were formerly going to be paying. So this will be going to the ballot later this year, Proposition HH. We came up with this. We hope that this is a good deal both for you guys and for your local governments, but ultimately it's up to you. So you can make that decision yourselves.
That's why you started. I feel like that you were very thorough, and what I want to help explain about that is we're all feeling it if you're a homeowner, right? My property taxes went up 43%, my assessed value did in 2 years. And I am appealing it, just like everyone else probably is trying to do. I had a great email from a constituent who talked about living in their home for 25 years. And it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. And they appealed it, and it was overruled, and then they went to the second source of appeal, and they did not get what they hoped they would get out of it. But their argument was this: I've been in my home for 25 years. I have not upgraded. I have not updated. I've just been able to afford to live in it. The value of my home is going up. Why? What's the number one reason? Comparables. What's going up around me, right? That is ultimately lifting my property value. To me, that's a problem that is a person power problem with our assessor's office. They're not able to identify when someone's home is obviously less valued than those around them, based on what the upgrades are, what the increases were, what the house is like, the condition. It is a blanket. Why? Because that is the easiest way to assess so many homes in the quickest way possible. And if we're going to try to become more equitable in our raising of our property values and be more mindful of the exact home and what's conditioned, because I believe my house is the worst house in my neighborhood. I absolutely believe that. Right? I hate my avocado green color. Okay? I feel the siding is peeling off. I have so many issues, but we all feel that certain things about our house that needs to be improved when we live in that house. So it's coming up and trying to find a way to really identify the increase. And is it true? Is it in line with the way it should be, the way the condition is? And that's something I intend to continue to work on here in the interim in the research that I've been doing. There have been suggestions, there's suggestion for a ballot issue to cap our property assessments at a certain rate every year at 2 or 3%. If we do that, we will bankrupt our local governments, our schools, our municipalities, because California did that in the 1970s. And what was the next thing that happened to California? Inflation hit 12%. But they could only increase the funding to their services, which were now costing 12% more, by 3%. So we have to be careful on the suggested solutions that could create more problems. If we had Gallagher still in place, this would even be more harmful to the places that do not have businesses in their districts, in their school districts, that have business properties. And it would be more harmful to those businesses in the increase in their property taxes. So for those who say, see, we told you this would happen. No, this was going to happen. It would have been worse for those school districts that do not have the support of manufacturing or industry to help increase their tax base. So it's a tough problem. I hear all of you. It is affecting me too. 303, Senate Bill 303, Proposition HH, will reduce your increase by 50% for the next 10 years. And while it's doing that, we need to work on a permanent solution. Thank you.
Agree with everything that was said there, and you brought up a really interesting point, which I think is extremely valid and extremely important in this context, which is why our home value is going up. Yes, it's due to comps, and also due to the fact that we have a housing crisis in Colorado, and housing prices across the board are going up. So your home valuation is going up because if you put it up for sale, you would be selling it for a lot more than if you bought it, 20 years ago, let's say. The reason for that is because there is not enough housing supply, and people are still moving to Colorado because we have a very strong economy here, and there are a lot of good jobs here, and a lot of well-paying jobs. So people are moving here from California, you know, bidding $100,000 over asking. And I know this because I am looking into potentially trying to buy a first house, and many of my friends are, and it's almost impossible. So in order to solve this problem long-term, we have to figure out how to get the housing prices under control, because these home values, they can benefit you if you sell your house, but they harm the person that's trying to buy a home. And of course, they also harm you every year when you have to pay these taxes that, especially if you're on a fixed income, it's just not tenable. So this has to be an integrated solution, and I agree that what we are hoping to pass with HH on the ballot this fall is just an interim temporary solution, but it's something that we have to pursue to make sure that people can stay in their homes while we figure something out that's more long-term.
I read Dickson, stole my thunder on that. I guess, I mean, integrated solutions are what's gonna solve this problem. You can't be a no on what is trying to be done to increase the supply of affordable, attainable housing, on allowing ADUs, on allowing transit corridors, and then also get upset when your property values keep going up and your taxes go up. That's like, I mean, I'll go to the analogy, that's like expecting to get better at a sport and not be willing to put in the work. These solutions are gonna take sacrifice and work and compromise. That is our job, that is what we're here to do. But we can't do it without you, right? There's some levers, there's some groups or silos that have more power than others. The only way you mitigate that is by showing up and showing out in the ways that you can, based on your ability, based on your time available, based on what you have. That is how we create holistic solutions that are gonna solve this problem. So.
Can you bring up 1255? Please, you have not
Yeah.
highlighted that.
Thank you, Senator Kolker. So you just mentioned House Bill 1255, which was one of my bills this session. It was a bill that says that local communities cannot just blanket say no to new housing in their community. So it allows local governments to continue to have discretionary review if someone comes to them and has a project that's, you know, that is untenable because there's not enough water or not enough roads, or they just don't like the project. They can still say no, but what a community can no longer do is say, we are full, no one else is allowed to move here. The reason that that's so important is that it completely strips property owners of any way to build housing, both to, you know, help themselves, to potentially live in a mother-in-law suite in their backyard. But it also prevents them from even getting a chance to go to their local government and show them why something would be really good for their community. And more than that, it takes away the local control of all the people in surrounding communities who now are forced to deal with the overflow and the bedroom community effects of this one community saying no more housing. So that's what 1255 does. It says you can still have whatever standards you want for new housing, but what you can't do is put up a no vacancy sign in your entire community. You have to allow people to do what they can to start solving this crisis. So I was very proud to be able to pass that bill this session.
All right, we do have more questions in the cards, but we're running a little short on time. So I want to make sure that we take questions from the audience spontaneously. So if you have questions that you want to ask, now's the time, raise your hand. Saw your hand up first.
Yeah, I'd like your perspective on what happened with, I forgot the name of the bill, but the assault weapons ban. It died it was a House bill, died in the House Judiciary Committee. Why did it not see the light of day beyond that? And what do you think of its chances of a ban on assault weapons in 2020?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to repeat the question so those online and those that can't hear. So the essence of the question is what happened to the assault weapons ban? So I guess I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, it did not pass out of committee because there were 2 Democrats that voted against the bill. I mean, we have a supermajority. The only way that things do not pass out of the House is when Democrats choose to vote against it. So that's the short answer.
Why did they vote against?
On that?
Why did they vote against?
We don't.
I am not gonna speak for those individuals. I don't mind holding my colleagues' feet to the fire. You can ask any of these folks if you do something that pisses me off, you know.
Doing it right now.
But also, especially with other Democratic colleagues, I am not going to speak for them on why they chose to vote against the bill. So you should look up what committee that went in front of, and you can look up what individuals voted against it, and you can reach out to their offices. I would ask that you start off being respectful and cordial. Show the best in HD 38 and 37, please. What's next? I suspect that it's going to be brought back again next year. And I know that there are federal Democrats that are also working on this on the national level, but as long as we have the slim majority in the Senate on the federal level, and as long as we don't have the House, the chances of that happening are next to none. So, sometimes you just have to keep pushing things forward. I remember my first time getting elected office, I got some bills passed that Rep. Singer, for those that don't know him, he's been a champion for equity and other issues, mental health, child welfare. He mentioned, he's like, man, maybe you were the magic sauce because you got stuff done that I didn't know. It's because you tried to run it 4 years in a row and finally people were listening. So we're not going to give up on this issue. We're going to keep working on this issue. So, all right, I saw another hand.
For Senator Kolker, when you were talking about education issues, you mentioned BS twice and all the way down my road. Said, what is that?
Sure.
So for those online, the question is around defining the BS factor.
It is what you think it is. To be short, and sweet. It is called the budget stabilization factor. Just for short. And it's basically a rule that allows us to write an IOU to education. To say we don't have enough money, we'll find it some other, you'll have to deal with it. And even though we have Amendment 23 that says we are supposed to fund education at a certain level, the Supreme Court of the state of Colorado has said that we can write an IOU. And it infuriates me, and I call BS on it myself, because we need to budget in our other programs, in our other departments, to make sure that education is our #1 priority. When this state was founded in 1876, they set aside a school land use trust, a school fund, a permanent fund, to make money off of government land that would go directly to public education. Don't tell me something came up later that came in front of that and prioritized itself ahead of what the founders of our Constitution said. Fund education. And I'm angry. You can tell. Thank you.
I was just thinking that, ultimately, the limitation on how many people can live in Colorado is gonna be water. What is the legislature thinking about with regards to water? I mean, eventually, we would almost have to stop all the moving trucks into Colorado and say, no more water.
Okay, I'm just going to restate the question for those online. The essence of the question is water rights and water usage are one of the biggest issues that are going to limit growth and people continuing to enjoy this amazing, beautiful state. So what are we doing to tend to that issue?
Great question, and of course, water is always on our minds. The first thing I'll say is that, of course, this is a cross-state issue. It's not just Colorado that is, concerned about water availability, and a lot of the decisions that we make have consequences downriver from us and across many states across the Southwest. So this is a really important issue, and certainly one that we're thinking about a lot. One thing I will say is that the actual uses of water in Colorado are not as directly dependent on the population of the state of Colorado as it might initially seem. The biggest water uses are agricultural and industrial, and then urban and sort of human land uses land uses and water uses are a much smaller portion of the water use here. So if we want to really tackle this problem, I think there are some other really big buckets that we can also look into to make sure that we are being as efficient as possible in our water use. And I'll also say that newer housing and especially slightly denser infill development is by its very nature much less water intensive. So if you don't have a lawn, or even if you don't have a setback in front of a house, that can reduce water usage a lot because it's about the length of the pipe, the length of the piping from the central water facility to an individual house. So if you have slightly denser development for a lot of the people that are moving in, you can actually support a lot more population on a lot less water. And that's not even getting into just sort of modern technological advancements that can also increase water efficiency. But one thing that is, I think, probably top of mind to a lot of people in this area is that we passed a water-wise landscaping bill that allows people who live in HOAs to install, nice looking, for example, xeriscaping on their front yards that is not just Kentucky bluegrass, but that they're able to have a lower water usage landscaping on their existing home. And that's something that people have been asking us for a long time, and it's very exciting.
Great, so we're running short on time, so I'm gonna end with kind of a check-in with everybody, because one of the questions was about, it was stated that this was a brutal or difficult session. What about it was brutal and difficult? Why is it so tough to do this work? And this kind of coincides with another submitted question on why vote Democrat? Why, what are we doing that is combating this sky is falling perspective coming from the other side? I think they're correlated, so I don't know who wants to speak to this. Okay, I have no problem speaking to this. So, I feel like in some ways that I was made to do this, and that, being in the military, you don't do it for the money. I promise you that. And you're dealing with high stress situations where you potentially could get shot at, blown up, go on down the line. To say that sometimes working this job makes me miss being shot at in Afghanistan is not hyperbolic, it's not an exaggeration. Like, it is not. Because at least over there, I at least in Afghanistan, I don't know what your personal feelings are, where you're at, not actually really. But I believe for the reasons that we were there in Afghanistan. Simply see what's happening to the women that are left in Afghanistan right now. And not only that, but I had a team of men and women that I depended on, me, that I trusted and could always have my back. Working under the dome is a very difficult environment because you are working with colleagues across the aisle that don't believe that you deserve to be treated as a person. And I'm gonna call it out, Rep. Bottoms. And the vitriol that he brings to that chamber in Representative Bottoms out of the Colorado Springs area. That's a pastor at a church, and I put that in air quotes because if you look at Christ's life, what he says has nothing to do with what he preaches half the time. Hateful, especially his anti-trans rhetoric. Dangerous, especially in the face of the Club Q shooting. And so what makes it so difficult is the fact that in moments they're allowed to come to the well and spew their hate. And we're supposed to go high. We're supposed to be the ones that respect the dignity of that institution and of all Coloradoans that put us there, whether they voted for us or not, whether they espouse those same hateful views or not. We are asked to be better. I remember the one time one of my colleagues, because one of my Republican colleagues had said a very ableist comment equating having a disability as choosing it. Well, when you choose to run with the bulls, you have to deal with with what comes from it, those consequences. And one of my colleagues came down to defend me and said that it was akin to the racist comments that come from them. And oh, but did they hoot and holler? And we had to go to a recess because some of them started coming down the well. She just simply spoke the truth, and it was too much. So that is part of what makes that work so difficult, is we are dealing with individuals that espouse racist, bigoted, hateful rhetoric.
and are elected because of it in their districts. Let's be very clear that there are some Americans out there that espouse this viewpoint. I view them no different than some that inspire international terror abroad. We've seen a rise in domestic terrorism here in this country because of those views. So that's part of what makes it difficult for me, is that we have to serve with individuals like that.
Thank you.
They're not all like that. I want to say that my dad is a Reagan-era conservative. We have some thoughtful ways. And part of the reason why is because my mom became a citizen under Reagan. And even though it was a Democratic legislature that worked with a Republican president to get that done, the bottom line is the one in charge gets credit for this thing. Right? Latinos remember that. So there are conservatives out there that have good ideas. Yeah, I'm gonna say it, this might be unpopular, but there are. I wish that they would keep it about low taxes and small government and quit trying to take away the rights of our LGBTQ community, of women, and stop spewing hateful rhetoric that is inspiring domestic terrorist acts. So the other thing is we're working on a limited time schedule. We are part-time, legislature. And we are expected to do so much with so little time. And I will commend, at least I can, I'll speak for my leadership, the majority leader specifically, who managed that calendar better than any year that I've been here. I mean, the first term I was there, we were making deals on the fentanyl bill at the 11th hour. We didn't pass school finance until the 11th hour on the last day of session. So kudos to them for managing the calendar well, but that's another constraint that we're working under. And politics is a rough place to be right now. We are a very divided nation on things that I, growing up, would have never thought that would be divisive issues. Science, masking up, doing the bare minimum for our fellow American, even if you espouse the views that masks do nothing. I sit in a wheelchair for the sacrifices I made for y'all. Y'all can't put on a mask? Are you serious? It is mind-boggling where we're at as a nation. It hurts my soul. And to be vulnerable and quite honest, it makes me question the sacrifices that I made for this nation. It does. That's what makes it difficult for me. That being said, I still believe in the best of this because I get to work with amazing colleagues like Rep. Dickson and Senator Kolker. And we don't always agree, but I'm proud to be able to work together with them. And I get to represent, for the most part, amazing individuals in this community, HD 38, HD 37, and Senate District 16. Do we have that? Yes. I will always believe in the best of Americans. I will always believe in the best in us at the end of the day. That's what makes this work worth doing. But it is a brutal session because there are others out there that constantly try and tear you down as an individual, tear you down as a team, and tear you down as a Coloradan and an American. That's part of what makes it difficult.
So as I said, this was my first session, and so I don't have a ton to compare it to, but certainly it was rough on me, and it was certainly rough compared to previous session voters I described. We won the election in November by a lot. All three of us up here ended up winning very close races, but people in a lot more difficult races than us also won in blue seats. And what that means is that all of the moderate and purple districts in Colorado are all represented by Democrats right now. And that is due to the hard work of many people in this room, so thank you. It means we have a 71% majority in the House. And it means that we are able to do all of the things that we listed out this session. I mean, you really have some very substantial legislation, and If we didn't have majorities, a lot of this would not have gone through. And instead, what we would have gotten is the priorities of people like Representative Ortiz has described. So I think that's a really important just point to make, is that one of the biggest reasons that I believe that it's great to vote for people like us is that we pass things that I hope that you care about, and that we are here to listen to you, and that we devote so much of our time to having town halls, to responding to emails from you, to having meetings to understand what you care about, because we are trying to be the kind of representatives that really represent you. So that's, sort of the basic case for that. But in terms of the argument about why it's been so crazy, like I said, all of the moderate districts are represented by Democrats. So the only Republicans that are in the House, at least, are from districts that reward being an extremist electorally. They will be primaried if they don't, which means that we are going to work every day. We have a workplace. We, get dressed in our suits and we go drive to work in a building where a large portion of our colleagues have publicly made threats to our safety, have publicly posted on social media about wanting a new civil war, have called us Nazis, have demonstrated multiple times in recent years that they are carrying concealed firearms in the legislature.
Wow.
In unsafe manners that mean that the firearm will just sort of fall out of their pocket and go off, or will be easily stolen. Both of those have happened in the last couple of years. And I think it's pretty reasonable for that to contribute to an unsafe feeling working environment.
Hello.
So that's just a little bit of the sort of dynamics of what we're dealing with.
I have
at
to
least in the
talk to
House.
you later. I'll call you back.
But what I will say is that can be very mentally taxing, but at the end of the day, we are here to serve you. And I am proud of what we have accomplished in the face of that very intense legislative session. So thank you for allowing us to have the opportunity to do this work.
And I come in as a comedy relief. When people ask me, how's the Senate treating me, I refer back to an old Normism from Cheers. Norm, how's life treating you? Like a baby treats a baby. And I use that. How's the Senate treating me? But it is hard, and we asked to be there. We came and asked you for money. We asked you for your vote. We asked you to knock on doors. We're not up here being, sad sacks, saying feel sorry for us. We're telling you how it is. The House is crazy. All right? The Senate is great.
So much.
So we have these back and forth, these jokes we make about it, but yes. You recall, I lost in 2018 in that seat. I lost by a few hundred votes. Things happen for a reason, people. Representative Ortiz is the right person at the right time to be able to rebut all those things that are being said and done to the people on the fringe and still do the work. Representative Dickson still does the work. I was on a phone call yesterday morning with my assistant for my day job. So today I had 3 client meetings, 3 reviews. I'm a certified financial planner. In the middle, over my lunch break, I met with the county commissioner and the Department of Human Services, because I'm on the Child Welfare Committee. That's an interim committee to go over some of the things that we could be talking about and some of the things I need to know before we have our first meeting. And I'll be meeting with Jefferson County commissioners next week. What I am doing is I am doing the work. I am balancing both. And I'm trying to make sure that what we do makes a difference. I was down yesterday. Many of you know my personal story that I deal with depression. I've dealt with depression since the 4th grade. It is hard. It is very hard. And I had people skeptical of me even running for office after I told them that I dealt with depression, that I struggled sometimes, that I had my times where I needed help. And I needed that help since the session was over in different ways. With my family, with exercise. But the best thing about that help that I get is to go back and look at what we did. Look at what we did. And Mike, my assistant, who works for my company but lives in North Carolina, and I talk to him about every day, every other day, or at least email him, told me that, Chris, you could be in North Carolina. You could be in Texas. You could be in Florida. You are doing the work. Acknowledge it. Realize what you've done. Tara, my wife, tells me the same thing. When it gets hard, why are we here? What are we doing? It is like a baby treats a diaper, but dang, it sure comes out cleaner sometimes. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you all for your support. I have one last announcement to make. I've officially filed to run for re-election next year. Senator, and I hope to my voting history, my voting record, my support for the LGBTQ plus community is unwavering. And that everyone understands we're all in this together. Thank you.
Folks, that wraps up our closed session town hall. Really, thank you so much for being here and contributing, participating. Everyone that joined us
Online, want to give you a shout out as well. Thank you so much. If you did not get your question answered,
we will, for those that got submitted, we will answer your questions. For those that wanted to ask a question and get an answer, please see our staff and we'll get you an answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shout out, we're gonna have a picnic on June 25th. It's on the Democratic Arapahoe County website. Just go there and register, and you will meet all kinds of more friendly, amazing Democrats.
June 25th, Arapahoe County website. You can find out more details there. And is there an RSVP?
Sunday the 25th.
Sunday the 25th.
Tombstone, there's a QR code.
Arapahoe County website.
Everyone come out, we would love to have you.